Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone, here with another solo pod DFS recap for week 9. I'm going to go over my teams, what I played, what I was thinking about, heading into the slate. Really want to go over, the running back position in particular, all the chalk that we saw and how it kind of played out, both in terms of actual fantasy points and in terms of ownership from the field. And then, we'll look at some post locks and stuff throughout. As well as some lineups that I didn't play that I thought about playing that, either simmed well or didn't. So going into the slate, there were 4 quarterbacks I wanted to most play, at least by Sunday morning. That was Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Drake May, and Mac Jones. I ended up playing this Mac Jones team in the Thunderdome that did not do well because it was a stack without CMC, which I was going back and forth on, but ultimately kind of agreed with the Sims. Just loved this team pre-lock, like clear number 1. And I don't always chase that, but on this slate, I tried a whole bunch of stuff, really liked this setup, and I decided to roll with it. And I do think it made sense, the Mac Jones without CMC, with the CMC ownership being so high, there being some really good pivots at the wide receiver position. At expensive price tags, particularly seeing Puka Nacua likely not to be played as much as he should, comes in at 19% in this contest. CMC himself came in at 72%. So I do think, kind of had that part right. And just really liking the value play running backs with Jalen Warren, Tracy, Monangai in particular, knowing Monangai would be extremely chalky, but thinking Tracy and Warren were pretty protected between Monangai, Henderson, and CMC taking up a lot of ownership. And that did come to fruition ownership-wise. Tracy owned a good bit, but for this contest, 30% isn't that high. Tiny squeeze on Jalen Warren at 19%. Only a couple other Mac Jones teams. Juwan Jennings did get played a little bit more than I hoped, but Kittle really didn't. So definitely were paths to this team winning, even though it was a little bit risky, investing in the San Francisco offense without CMC. The team I played in the game changer was also Warren, Tracy, Monangai, and kind of thought there was an edge there with where the CMC ownership was going to come in at. Particularly kind of knew both Monangai and CMC were going to be owned more than we projected. Didn't think it would be to the extent that it ended up happening. But yeah, Monangai comes in 87% in this contest. Let's see what CMC comes in at 47%, which is pretty high for an expensive player. Both him and Chase, really owned there, except I thought there was more opportunity cost actually at running back than wide receiver. And obviously, I'm going to play Chase as the bring back here on the Caleb stuff anyway. So I was invested in that. Managed to play DJ Moore, kind of, told the Sims I know better when they told me to play Olamide Zaccheaus, the cheaper kind of version of this stack. I now waived that, played Caleb with Monangai, Odunze, and Moore with the Chase bring back. And my hope was, like, if we get a really nutty game, you kind of want this overinvestment in the offense, right? Like, there's enough in this type of game environment for a lot of guys to get there. Because on paper, you might be worried about playing Odunze with DJ Moore, thinking there's, not enough potential there. Well, we saw there was enough potential. Colston Loveland, absolutely massive game. Zaccheaus, really strong game. DJ Moore gets there. Rome Odunze puts up a goose egg in a 47-42 game in which he was not hurt at all. So really impressive stuff by me there. Did get the ownership I wanted, though. Really, Caleb at 11% I thought was outstanding. Odunze and Moore both in the single digits as hoped. Kind of figured this Jaguars defense against Geno would be under-owned 5%. They were. Did want to get a Tyler Warren team into my lineup this week because I thought there were some paths to the Colts having to just pass a ton, and that could be really good for him. So I fit in the mini correlation there between Warren and Warren, the Warren mini correlation, Jalen Warren there for Pittsburgh. So my final team, I knew I wanted to play a Lawrence team. I went a little hedgier at running back, knowing I already got two chase teams out there with the CMC fade, even though I think CMC fade, if for one team's probably right, when you are hand building a few teams, I do kind of like to think through, well, if I'm wrong, where could I be wrong, either input wise or fantasy point wise? So never trying to hedge necessarily, but I did play this team as if Travion Henderson were to project better than Tyrone Tracy, and that CMC was going to get a better result than Jamar Chase. So it didn't sim as well pre-lock, and you'll see post-lock it didn't either. But that's because my assumptions on this were to be a little bit hedgier at running back. I know the Sims did like the Lawrence double with the Bowers bring back. Did get steamed up a little bit, and going back to the Zacchaeus thing with the Caleb stack, other unfortunate read by me is, not only, maybe whiffing on the upside for him, but everybody went to Parker Washington over Olamide. So that hurt a little bit too. This team does end up finishing third place. So I had a winning day. Obviously, a lot of my actions in the Thunderdome where, a lot of times my days just made on that tournament, but came in third out of 100 in the 2K luxury box. With this team, maybe had some lags if Cincinnati doesn't go absolutely bonkers at the end, but you can say the exact same thing about my stack that gets 2 touchdowns in overtime from Trevor Lawrence and Brock Bowers. Was able to overcome the Brian Thomas Jr. failure. Really wanted to play Brian Thomas Jr. I didn't have any Parker Washington Bowers mini correlations elsewhere. That was a really profitable way to approach the slate for some other people I know. I didn't get there because, again, only making 3 teams kind of got my exposure on this team. Thought Puka was a smash play, though, at ownership. And, he finished 5 yards short of the bonus, left with injury. Also almost had a second touchdown that I kind of thought they were going to challenge and get him the touchdown, but they didn't challenge it, where he was like, went out of bounds at like the half-yard line. And he still puts up, beats Chase, puts up a good day. Could have been easily a 30-plus point day for Puka. I think he was, both prior to the slate and after the slate, one of the best plays, with CMC and Chase both being over-owned relative to Puka Nacua. So those were my teams in terms of how they simmed post-lock. This Mac Jones team, TJ actually played in the 7-7-7 touch pass, which 100 entries. I can't look at the Thunderdome post-lock sims on Solver, but TJ played that team and it finished as the top simming team over there. And I assume it would be, similar for the Thunderdome. So that simmed well. My game changer team was okay. It simmed at a 51% ROI. Not the top, but in the top 15 or so teams. And then, as I mentioned, my team that actually did best didn't sim as well. I finished third. It simmed with a negative 4% ROI. And I want to talk about that a little bit. When you're looking at these post-lock sim ROIs, you have to understand that is based off all of our inputs in for ETR in terms of the fantasy point projections and the sims that operate off of that. We're not going to be 100% right in those. I've talked about this before, but especially on a week with a lot of uncertainty as far as the running back inputs, we're not, always going to be right. We're going to be right. So a couple things. I think Manon Guy would sim a little bit better if we were to redo that projection. He goes full workhorse, 81% carry share. We projected 67%. Now, there's a difference between a guy that we project at 65%, who just is going to, at times, due to the distribution things, have a 75% carry share projection. And if we were to reproject that game, we'd still do 65%, even knowing that outcome. And then there's other players, though, where we project at 65%. And if we were to redo it over again, we would project at 75%. I think Manon Guy is one of those players where we would have gotten into the 70s. Some of the touchdown stuff would have been a little bit higher for him as well. So he would have, simmed better. The other big spot here, as I noted, I kind of played this as Travion Henderson outplaying Tyrone Tracy. Pre-lock sims aren't going to like almost anything with Henderson over Tracy because we projected Henderson for less fantasy points and more ownership. So it's really hard to get the sims to say, hey, play this guy over the guy who projects better and is lower owned. It's just not going to happen, but that's why you can edit the sim projection. And with Henderson, we were right on with the rushing split, maybe a little bit hot, but the target share ended up almost double what we had. I think we had 11.5%. It came in at 20%. Something Drew talked about on the Established the Millie show for ETR that we do on Saturday mornings. So Henderson would look a little bit more favorable if we were to redo that projection. We probably would legitimately move that target share, not to 20%, but maybe to 14, 15%. On the flip side, Tyrone Tracy ends up splitting a lot more with Devin Singletary than we expected. I don't know how much of that was game flow and whatnot, but it's pretty annoying, especially in the red zone area. I noticed a lot of Singletary out there. So our Tracy projection, if we were to reach them after the fact, would be lower. So those are things that obviously the post-lock sims aren't going to know. If we were to reproject, it would look differently. So always keep that type of stuff in mind. And that when you do have chalk I was talking to Sam Broad about this. He was asking me about how to attack these situations where we have these very well projected running backs in all uncertain situations. And it's tough. As you can see, we had misses in various directions. It's not like we were overconfident in all these uncertain situations. We were wrong on Tracy because he played less. We were a little bit wrong on Henderson and Monangai, who we had projected very well because they got more of a workload. And then we also had a situation with Kamani Vidal, who was owned a little more than I expected and just completely unforeseen. He ends up with a 55% carry share to Jarrett Patterson's 41%. The previous week, it was 64-31, but that was in a game where there were a ton of running back touches, and a lot of those came in a blowout for Patterson. So I don't really know how foreseeable that was. So even in the situations that don't seem as uncertain, sometimes you can get rug pulled a little bit. But yeah, things I might have done differently if we look at, some of the top simming teams here. If I go to the game changer and just sort on the top simming teams, you can see the very top team has Bijan Robinson. And I think that was a good play. That was one that I was really close to pulling the trigger on pre-lock, but he wasn't simming great at 5%. And I wasn't sure if he would get squeezed all the way down to like 1 to 3%. In all the high stakes small field stuff, he was like 1%. That's going to be a good play at 1%. Pivot direct off CMC, who not only is Bijan 1%, but CMC goes from projected in the mid to high 30s to 50% ownership. So I probably would have played a Bijan Robinson team. You do see a lot of 3 running back teams that are all the value running backs without CMC. That is something obviously that I played on my 2 non-CMC lineups, going with the Jalen Warren, Tyrone Tracy, and Monangai approach. That did sim pretty well post-lock. But yeah, so hopefully that's kind of the big thing at the running back position. You're not going to, most of the teams that had CMC still simming well post-lock are teams that were a little bit more contrarian somewhere else. You still could have played CMC, I want to be clear, even though there was an opportunity to fade him, even though he did get steamed. There are CMC Monangai lineups that sim well. In the game changer, the 3rd best lineup is a CMC lineup with Monangai in there. That is a Drake May stack that looks really good. And I'll talk a little bit more about the May stuff here in a second. The other thing I wanted to point out, that Trevor Lawrence version of my team with CMC, that I said didn't sim well post-lock because, I had boosted Henderson and I had docked Tyrone Tracy. So even though it didn't sim well post-lock, it did finish well. And I do think in reality, it was a better team than the Sims thought. There was a team in the game changer that was really close to it. It was CMC, Jalen Warren, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Brian Thomas, Washington Bowers stack with Manon guy and Falcons D. So essentially, if you look at the team that I ended up playing, instead of Henderson Texans, Puka, it was Warren Amon-Ra Falcons. So a 3v3. Amon-Ra, who I had flag planted, didn't end up playing because by Sunday morning, I didn't think he was going to get squeezed. Does get squeezed to 8% in this contest. And we just had Warren and Falcons projecting a little bit better. So you can see where you can take a team that does sim well, make a few adjustments, and play a team that I think is a good team to play, even though it's not going to sim as well. So that was the 3v3 kind of off there on what simmed well post-lock and what didn't. Both those teams ended up with pretty strong results. As far as, I think the other thing that's interesting to look at is, honestly, like sometimes you still just need to get the combos right. Like you can play, you think as good as possible. It's funny looking at the game changer sims and seeing back to back, two of the better lineups, my Caleb lineup and the team that won, Grex 1-2-3's Caleb lineup, simming extremely similarly. Grex went with CMC Zacchaeus Bowers over my Tracy Adunze Warren, essentially. Like that was essentially the difference. He also flipped the defense too and did the correlation with CMC on his defense. But sometimes you just gotta get the combos right, man. Like, very similar concept, pretty close. We both show up with Caleb, DJ Moore, Manon guy stacks with a Chase bringback, playing Jalen Warren on those teams. We're both paying up for kind of this high upside, exciting young tight end. He's got Bowers. I've got Tyler Warren, who I wanted the mini correlation with Jalen Warren. But yeah, Hadunze falls flat, Zacchaeus hits, and then obviously Tracy versus CMC is a huge difference as well. So, the margins can be thin here. So it's really hard to win a tournament and get that exactly right. But you want to that's something I see, and I still feel optimistic about the team I played and feel good moving forward. I also simmed a bunch of teams, all my saved lineups on Solver post-lock in the game changer. If you can see the screen, you can see, but the top teams do have CMC, even have Manon, or these are actually, I had it filtered on CMC. The top teams don't have CMC. The top teams are all Drake May stacks though. And I was really close to playing this pre-lock, and I wasn't totally sure what would happen with the ownership. If I was going to play it, I was going to play it with the Drake London bring back because I felt like he is going to get squeezed more than we have it. So if I'm playing this stack, I want the Drake London correlation in it. Obviously, Drake London goes off a huge amount, but I wasn't sure the Drake May side of things. I also thought this was an intelligent way to play Travion Henderson to just bet on the offense, and knowing that I could be wrong on the pass catching role, and that increases the correlation with Drake May. So in hindsight, I think I should have played a Drake May team, even though the slate worked out okay for me. Especially because, he goes from projected 6% ownership. He comes in at 1% owned in the game changer. Stephon Diggs, 2%. Hunter Henry, 1%. Drake London, 2.5%. Just really, really low ownerships. Travion Henderson, Tracy, and Jalen Warren, who I all played, none of them get steamed. So you can see where that team simmed well post-lock. And there's a consistent theme that on the show, which has been, if you can find this stuff that sims okay at 5 to 8% owned and then comes in at like 3% ownership, that stuff's simming really well post-lock, especially in tournaments I talk about, like the Wildcat, which unfortunately we haven't gotten because they do a lot of the 555 milli. But even this week in my small field stuff, 200, 300, 100 person sized tournaments, this May stuff was squeezed so much that the sims that told you pre-lock was kind of like, it's a little bit too contrarian to play in this field. Then you get all the kind of obvious chalk steam, and then the squeeze on the stack, and the sims are like, yeah, that contrarian angle actually did have a lot of edge. Your cash rate might not be amazing, but your odds of winning really go up. And that's why those lineups sim so well. If I sort just on wins, it's Drake May lineups at the very top. But I do want to point out, like, even when you do post-lock sims, don't get too laser focused on the very top. I talked about the inputs not always being 100% right. There were still ways you could play McCaffrey. There were some very good McCaffrey Manon guy teams that simmed well for me in my saved lineups post-lock. Including one with Drake May, some with Caleb Williams that, potentially could have gotten there. A lot of those do have Roma Dunze, unfortunately, and so there's no way that those were going to win. But it's fun to kind of look at that stuff. But yeah, so in addition to that consistent theme, though, of those low, if you can identify the squeeze on a stack that you think has some juice, like that's great to play in any field size. The other thing is, when we get these running back values that outproject the rest, even when the rest of the field is strong, those top running back values are just getting played at an insane clip. As I said, I thought Manon guy CMC would get played more than we projected in small field in the stuff I play, because it's even smaller than most small field tournaments. I didn't see it as high as it was. Manon guy was 85 to 90%. Definitely think there were good teams to fade him. You could have done Warren, Tracy, and Henderson, I think, was a really sharp way to do it. Obviously, we were wrong on the Tracy input, so our replay, I probably wouldn't do that, with the new Tracy projection, but he gets the Bears next week, so we'll see how long that taste in my mouth lasts. But probably when I play Manon guy, and CMC gets steamed a lot, but you could still find teams with CMC Manon guy that simmed well if you played like Drake May, if you got a little bit different elsewhere. So I thought that was interesting. The other stack in that same vein that I thought about for about half a second, didn't really come that close to playing it. But if you're seeing my screen, you also notice there's a couple of Justin Herbert stacks that finish in the top 10 in terms of the post-lock sims. And Herbert comes in at 3%. We projected 4. Ladd comes in at 10%. We projected 13. Kind of saw that coming. Gadsden at tight end projected 5%, comes in at 1%. Figured people would kind of stay off that with game script concerns against Tennessee. That's another thing that simmed really well post-lock that I think was interesting, because it is a high upside stack. Betting on good teams and good stacks where we've seen this ceiling before in situations that are maybe less than ideal, that the field is maybe going to double, triple count, especially when there's more favorable options, is, I think, a profitable thing to look at over the long run. That'll do it for this slate. I will point out the post-lock stuff, not just for the actual lineups, but the lineups I saved that, I run against the actual field. A lot of Caleb teams with Bijan Robinson. So I said there were plenty of Caleb teams with CMC that simmed well, but the very best were Caleb with Bijan Robinson, which I think, does make sense. There's the cheap Caleb stack, Caleb to Zacchaeus, who comes in at 6% instead of 11, while Caleb holds steady. You could have played that, with a 1% Bijan Robinson instead of CMC, and really kind of giving yourself huge levers. Now, you'll notice the CMC versions, if I look at just the Caleb teams, the CMC versions have a better cash rate for the most part, right? They're going to cash more often than these Bijan teams for sure. But they just don't win quite as much. If I sort on cash rate, a lot of these are CMC teams. So just something to keep in mind. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you have any feedback for things you would like to see in the future, or on Sunday nights, if there's something that happened in a slate that you want me to cover in particular, reach out either on the Established Run Discord or tag me on X, and I'll see if I can incorporate it into the show. Best of luck in week 10.